Hello, welcome. This is Barry Cooper from Cooper Cary. Have words a very happy new year to you. I'm here with my friend James Cary, who is 4,000 miles away in Yeovil, Somerset. James, how did the festive period treat you?
It treated me well. I had to work, unfortunately, between Christmas and New Year, but it was money for which there was, work for money, so I can't really complain too much.
Right.
But we Christmased all the way to 12th night, and we have a celebration of 12th night in our house to kind of round off Christmas so that it doesn't kind of just dribble disappointingly away.
Now, my knowledge of Twelfth Night is based solely on the Shakespeare play, so I'm assuming that you mean that you do a lot of cross-dressing in the house. Is that what happens, or what?
Yeah, iambic pentameter, and lots of verity and forsooth.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Badinage, which I think is 17th century for bants, isn't it?
It is. Never goodinage, it's always badinage, isn't it?
That is the word of the podcast. That
was comedy that's worthy of Shakespeare himself. Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. How about you?
It was good. It was lovely. Had my sister over, which was a joy, and had a great time. Now, in this episode, we're going to be talking about productivity.
Hence, we've got straight to the point.
Straight to the point. I don't know about you, James, but looking at this subject, there seems to be never-ending fountain of books to do with productivity. You know, are you productive? Do you get things done? Or do you constantly feel like you're chasing your tail, with life happening to you rather than you happening to life? This is a very strong introduction, isn't it? I think I should actually write one of these books, to be honest.
You should.
I'll be the only person left on the planet who hasn't written one, but how can I be more productive in my life and feel less overwhelmed? I suppose that's the gist of it, isn't it? That's the promise of these books and these seminars. And to be honest, I don't know about you, but if you don't currently feel overwhelmed with your life, you will when you see how many titles there are in this marketplace. So things like Getting Things Done by David Allen, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, Deep Work by Cal Newport. I know you've read, I think you've read that, so I'll ask you about that in a sec. The One Thing by Gary Keller, Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. That's the name.
I shan't ask you to say that again.
No, thank you, don't. I just spell it out phonetically in my notes there. And 1,000 TED Talks by Simon Sinek. And it's weird though, isn't it? It's mostly North American authors. I don't know whether there are any British authors in this particular space of productivity and what that says about these sorts of books. Do you think that, am I missing some great British guru of productivity that's out there somewhere?
Probably not since Victorian times. There's probably a really great Victorian book of real, up at 5, cold shower,
yes.
March around the house several times.
Invade several foreign countries. Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Get locals to carry your bags. By which time you've reached breakfast. So what? It's like, and then the day can begin.
That's right.
I don't get that much done in a month.
I remember reading in the biography of Charles Simeon that when he was at Cambridge, he used to get up and swim across the icy Cam River every morning at 5 a.m. I think it was 5 a.m. I mean, just getting up at 5. That seems very productive. And I guess that brings us to a key question, which we'll get to, which is what is it we actually mean by productivity? Because you can't be productive unless you know what it is you're aiming at. And I wonder if a Christian definition of productivity is going to be different from the many definitions of productivity that you get in the sorts of books that I've mentioned anyway already. Have you had any, James? Have you had any encounters with any of this material before? Has it been a thing in your life at all? Books on productivity, seminars?
Yes, it must have been. Yes, in fact, I think I've spoken about on this podcast before. I listened to the ludicrously entitled 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss.
Right.
Which I thought was actually really helpful, even though I didn't agree with quite a lot of it, but I knew what he was going for. And it gave me a bit of a shove in the right direction, mainly just stopping me from wasting my time doing things that I don't want to do and that I'm not very good at, and that it's probably not very helpful. So I think my impression of a lot of these books is they are trying to some extent, save us from ourselves, because we consistently make bad choices or choices that feel like the right thing or the polite thing, and are not if you continue to work in that way, because the way we work and our practice of working daily has decades worth of consequences. You know, if you get a habit and you do it every day, it's going to have a consequence. So you know, make sure that you get some good habits, because bad habits will really be a problem if you're trying to be productive.
Yeah,
but is that the aim? I mean, is productivity itself overrated?
Yeah, I must admit, I ought to confess up front, I've got a sort of deep-seated suspicion of this whole genre. I want to confess to that, because I've no doubt that there are, as you say, lots of really helpful principles we can get from it. My cynicism about it, I guess, is rooted in the fact that when I was 21, I'd just become a Christian, and I was scalped, as many British undergraduate students are, by an American organisation called Southwestern, who come over, recruit British students, and then say, come and sell books door to door in the US for your summer job. And they promise lots of money. And you go to Nashville and you train at Southwestern. I had like a week's boot camp, which was all very much focused on productivity, on being the most amazing seller of books, that you can do it. You've just got to get up you've got to get up and have an icy cold shower. It's literally one of the tips they gave you. You would recite mantras to yourself in the mirror about how fantastic a salesperson you were going to be. And of course, the whole thing was a pyramid selling kind of deal. Needless to say, I proved that you couldn't become a brilliant seller even by sheer force of will, because I was shockingly bad at it. I think I was probably officially a non-profit making organisation by the end of it. And
you somehow managed to collapse the pyramid, a profoundly stable structure, but somehow Barry managed to ruin that particular pyramid.
That's right.
Good work, my friend. Good work.
That's right. And so I do, when I look at these books, some of them, to me, it has a bit of a whiff of that. There's a bit of almost like the whiff of the Ubermensch. Like, you know, you can be omnipotent. You can perfect your ability to, you know, pack in more hours into the day. You don't really need sleep. Sleep is for weaklings, you know. And
well, I've got Mark Wahlberg's schedule here in front of me. I remember this did the rounds a few years ago,
right?
And I just found it, and it says 2:30 a.m. wake up, 2:45 a.m. prayer time, 3:15 breakfast, 3:40 to 5:15 a.m. workout, 5:30 post-workout meal, shower, golf, snack, cryo chamber recovery. I mean, which one of us doesn't struggle to get the cryo chamber recovery? Thing is, he's going to bed at 7:30, and so it's like, well, all you've just done is just shifted your day supremely early.
But he's still only getting 6 hours sleep, though. That's still pretty bonkers. I mean, Margaret Thatcher famously had 4 hours, didn't she? But most people.
Well, no, if you're getting to bed at 7:30, you get up at 2:30. You're getting some hefty sleep in there, aren't you? You're getting 7 hours.
Maybe just about. But you go to sleep as soon as your head hits the pillow. I mean, it doesn't work for me. But that's the thing, isn't it? I just don't understand the sort of, it doesn't, none of it really, it feels like you are trying to be God in a funny sort of way. And hey, Mark Wahlberg wants to be God. I can imagine worse candidates, I guess, but he's certainly got the abs for it. But it just seems unrealistic to me.
I wonder also, I think Mark Wahlberg's probably got quite a good sense of humour. He seems like an interesting kind of guy, and I wonder if he just
Do you think this was a joke?
Yeah, I just put it out. You know, I did this for one day and it nearly killed me.
You had a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
Day 2, checked into Betty Ford. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, could be. So I suppose, well, maybe we should get into that. What is productivity? I keep saying productivity. This is what comes of marrying an American
because you now
lady.
live in Florida, Barry, and it's
it does happen. You have to be understood. I also say water when I go through drive-throughs as well. Because you just have to. You just got to get on in life. Yeah.
You've changed.
What is productivity for a believer, and is it different, do you think, to a more secular definition of productivity?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the one thing that's pointed out to me, I listened to a podcast which you put me onto because they had an episode about the metaverse, which we are going to get around to talking about at some point. Redeeming Productivity is the name of the podcast. And this guy, I've forgotten his name. Let me just pull his name up on the screen.
Reagan Rose.
Reagan Rose.
Reagan Rose.
And he said that he has a beef with Getting Things Done by David Allen, which my understanding was that you were going to have read that book by the time we talked about productivity on this podcast.
Well, I've already told you I don't really care for productivity books. That's what it gets you. You don't read them.
And
so
Getting Things Done is very much the first hurdle of,
That's right.
The sequel or not. But he said that the book sort of promises a Zen-like ability to be ready for anything, so that you've just sort of got a system so that you can just always be, you're like water or something is the expression, where it's like, when something splashes in water, it makes exactly the right number of ripples in response, and no more and no less. And so you just kind of need this system that's going to, and Regan points out, he says, you would say that if you're sort of a Buddhist, which David Allen sort of is, but Christians
sort of
don't
did
believe
not to
that,
be.
because our work has been cursed. So, if we find it hard, if we're gardening and we're finding lots of thorns and thistles, newsflash, breaking 6,000 years ago, curse. And if there's going to be sweat in order to get the work done, then that's all normal and to be expected. And therefore, there is this kind of promise of a productive life of work, which is sort of smooth and easy, and it isn't like that. That's not to say that we shouldn't be sensible and have robust systems and all that kind of stuff. It's just that promise.
It's overreaching, isn't it?
And I know that the Tony Robbins kind of thing as well, isn't it, is productivity and fulfillment, and there's a whole load of stuff around that. And if you're a Christian, you're listening to that stuff just going, this is sort of Christianity, isn't it? Except without Jesus, who is the one who can give you the spirit that will actually help you to change. So... Yes. What are you making of this?
Well, it does. It doesn't really sound to me so much like Christianity as the sort of thing that the Pharisees were peddling. That was just putting burdens on people, because it's making you the savior, isn't it? It's not even Tony Robbins who's the savior. It's you. Like, you can do this if you put into practice these steps, if you work hard enough, if you want it enough. Dream a dream. And in the end, what sounds like a wonderfully, what an open-ended wonderland, that sounds like it's more of a hellish prison, because you are trapped by your own impossibility, the impossibility of you being God. You cannot do certain things. You weren't made to. So there's kind of a lack of grace in a lot of these books, it seems to me, and a lot of a failure to acknowledge our own frailty, our own fallibility, and so on. So I guess that's kind of the issue. I thought there was a really helpful paragraph. Matt Perman, who was a guy, I'm not sure what he's doing now. I think he used to work for Desiring God, and certainly John Piper wrote the foreword to his book, What's Best Next. I thought he wrote something that was quite useful. He said, when most people think of productivity, they think of efficiency, getting more things done in less time. When we see so many things coming at us, our tendency is to speed up. This isn't always bad, but if this is our first and primary solution, it will backfire. He says, while efficiency is important, it works only when we make it secondary, not primary. It doesn't matter how efficient you are if you're doing the wrong things in the first place. More important, he says, than efficiency is effectiveness. In other words, getting the right things done. In other words, productivity is not first about getting more things done faster, it's about getting the right things done. And I think, to me, that sounds like it's approaching more of what you might call a Christian take on productivity, because it reminds me of Mary and Martha, actually, in Luke chapter 10, when Jesus says, well, she has chosen what is better, is choosing the best thing in this situation. And I think that's huge, because if you think about what does productivity look like for Mary and Martha in Luke chapter 10, I'm guessing not many of the books in the genre would say, well, just sit at Jesus' feet and listen to him, like Mary does. But that is obviously exactly what Jesus commends. And what's really interesting about it, having looked at it again today, is for those of us who are in some sort of Christian ministry, whatever that means, Jesus commends that sitting and listening to him even above serving him, which is what Martha is trying to do, right? So I really need to hear that. I spend so much time doing ministry that just crowds out just sitting and listening to him, and I think I kid myself that doing ministry is listening to him when actually it's not. So I think going back to that definition of productivity, it's choosing what is best in any given situation. And for most of us, I think we do a lot better, a lot more just sitting at the feet of Jesus and listening, just monotasking, listening to Jesus.
Yeah. And actually, if we look at how Jesus operated, we only really have accounts of a 2 to 3 year period of his life,
right,
where he's moving around a lot and he's speaking a lot. But it's kind of it's hard to discern serious progressions in productivity in that period of time, because the Gospels have slightly different emphases and orders and that kind of thing. And how's the book going, Jesus? Well, he didn't write a book. He didn't establish a specific organization. You know, he gave principles for the church. And then I guess what's more applicable for us is the Great Commission, go and make disciples of all nations. And I mean, it's sort of comical as a overstretched goal of you make disciples of all nations. So this is the big picture. If you want some blue sky thinking before Jesus goes into literally the blue sky and ascends into heaven, here's the plan. Go make disciples of all nations. Okay, let me know how you get on. Sayonara. And they kind of get on with it. And there are lots of little churches within a lifetime. And then there are some more churches a lifetime after that. And then eventually the Roman Empire becomes Christian, but not for a few hundred years. And then the whole West is Christianized, and for 1,000 years is predominantly Christian. That seems to be going quite well. That's now declining. Other parts of the world are becoming more and more Christian. China is becoming more Christian. And so it can't, so I think we like big goals and ambitions. Well, how bigger could make disciples of all nations be? But also God is playing the long game in building his kingdom. And I think we consistently think of ourselves as, I've got a big list of stuff to get done. And this is pointed out again on that Redeeming Productivity podcast when Reagan was interviewing a guy who'd written a book about this kind of stuff as well, Jordan Rayner, where they basically said, God will finish my to-do list if it's also on his to-do list. There's quite a good chance that a lot of your to-do list is only on your list and it's not on anybody else's. And it was sort of pointed out that God used Moses to lead the people out of Egypt. And he could have used Moses to take them into the promised land. But he didn't. He used Joshua. And God uses different people. And then, I was just thinking about this afterwards, how God will raise up someone like Gideon to do his work for him. Because with someone like Gideon, it's obvious that it's God at work and not some mighty guy called Gideon, because Gideon's kind of a joke. When he is called by the angel, or Jesus, I don't know how your Christology's working there, Gideon says, I'm from the smallest clan of the weakest tribe, and I can't do Wednesdays. It's like...
And the angel said, yeah, that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, get this great army together, and don't need half of those. Get it smaller, get smaller, get smaller. Whichever one's cut with their hands, And then it's okay because I'm going to make the enemy panic anyway. So you don't even need to know which end of a sword to hold, to be honest.
Right.
So it's just working. For me, the thing is always, the indispensability of myself to the kingdom of God, the importance of getting through my list and the things that I think would be really cool, the things that I would like to get done.
Yeah.
So I'm my own worst enemy in that, because God hasn't put that burden on me. I've put that burden on myself.
Yeah, and I guess this is one of the reasons why one of the most countercultural things for us that Jesus does is retreat a lot and spend a lot of time in solitude and a lot of time in prayer and a lot of time being alone. That seems to really chafe at us because it seems, if we're honest, I think as Christians, we sort of feel like that's probably wasted time, So that for me is, again, what's interesting in a lot of the productivity literature is that rest is often pitted against productivity. So they're like two separate things. And sleep, for example, is kind of the enemy of productivity. What, you're going to spend a third of your life unconscious, literally doing nothing except snoring. There's no productivity there at all. And yet it seems that if you're approaching a Christian definition of productivity, you have to say that sleep and rest more broadly is not opposed to productivity, is very much a part of it. God has given you that so that you will be more productive. He wants you to have aloneness. He wants you to have solitude. He wants you to retreat, to pray, to be silent, to switch off the device, I think, a lot of the time. So that, I think, is one of the distinctives, just being able to resist the urge to be constantly producing stuff and actually acknowledging your finitude,
I've definitely noticed that since I took the Lord's Day, Sabbath, much more seriously in the last few years, I am more productive in the week. And I really look forward to Sunday and not working.
Right.
And when I am on Sunday, I'm enjoying it. I don't check him. I don't check my email. I don't look at anything. I don't think about anything. Yesterday, I was recording on a Monday. I had to work yesterday because I had no choice over it. And about once or twice a year, I have to work on a Sunday because, a thing has happened and I'm not always in charge of my own schedule. But I'd never choose to work, even on Sunday night, to get a head start on the week, anything like that.
You're a bit like Eric Little, aren't you, in that respect?
Well, kind of. But I think that's for others to say.
All we need is Vangelis to write a soundtrack and Bob's your uncle.
Yeah. Of me typing in the...
No, refusing to type. Yeah.
Refusing to type, yes, that's right. Laying my...
That's right.
But when I type, I feel God's pleasure.
Yeah.
But I really do think that it's helped me work, and it's no surprise really. I'm reading Deep Work by Cal Newport. One of the things he does talk about, and we can talk about the importance of deep work and what that is, partly in, it's not shallow work. There are sort of two types of work, I suppose, and that's what he is postulating. But actually, there's a lot of scientific data, I believe, which backs up the fact that you are much more productive when you have also a break in the middle of the day, where you take a full lunch hour, go for a walk, clear your head, don't take a device with you, or at least don't check your messages or do anything like that, because that's just basically going to do something to your brain that means that when it comes back to work, it's now tired.
Yes.
So
you need a proper reboot.
Yeah. So I think the rest is really important. And then at the end of the day, whatever time you decide to shut the laptop or whatever work you do, switch off the machine, walk away, it's really important that you don't keep checking your messages.
Yeah.
And it's not just because of a thing called work-life balance, which I'm increasingly thinking is a myth anyway, but we can maybe get into that. It's not just about the balance is the fact that you won't work as well the next morning if an email and a bunch of stuff has been gnawing away at your brain overnight, and you come back to it in the morning. It's much, much more healthy just to go, okay, that's my last email of the day. That's the last thing I'm doing. You put the laptop down, you walk out.
One of the guests.
So I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah, it's hugely important. One of the guests on the Redeeming Productivity podcast that you and I have been listening to.
We're going to have to get him on, aren't we? I mean, this is slightly obscene now, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think he seems like a good guy. But it was one of his guests who said that, that what he'd done is he'd sort of set it up so that he checks for emails and texts, I think, sort of like 3 times a day, I think he was saying. And he said it's very interesting that it's become almost axiomatic that we have our best ideas in the shower. Why? Well, it's the only place left that is a smartphone-free zone for most people. I think there might be something in that. So I've gone nuclear option, and I've decided, as you know, as listeners to our previous shows know, I don't really do New Year's resolutions. Nevertheless, I've made a resolution which happens to have fallen at the beginning of a new year, and the resolution is that I'm going to check emails and texts twice a day. I've gone nuclear option. I'm going to go 12 o'clock and 4 o'clock to give me a bit of time at the end of the workday to deal with it, but try not to check it otherwise. That's what I'm going to try and do. You can talk to me in a couple of weeks and ask me how it's going, but I've just become so convicted of how scattered I feel, how just thinly spread and not present and not going, not doing I've not read the Cal book, but deep work sounds like the sort of thing I want to be doing more of.
Yeah. And let's just talk about email then in particular, because I think that was one of my take homes from the book, which I literally finished reading this morning. And not only does he sort of go a bit nuclear on social media, but we can talk about that, but it feels like we've sort of done that before. We all know that it's toxic and a drug, and that's why I don't have it on my phone and I don't have it on my iPad, and I'm not particularly present on Facebook, and but email, I think, is something through which I've sort of used it as my to-do list, which in some senses I'm okay with, but actually there's this email chain conversation thread thing which just drips away, where 15 people are included on this email, or somebody sends you something and just sort of says thoughts on this. It's just like, and this is one thing where I'm going to positively quote, stand back, Mark Driscoll, because he was quite big on productivity when he started, about, especially men, you need to think about your weight, you need to think about your productivity, you need to think about this and that and the other, and this kind of boot camp stuff. He should always have been doing a parachurch men's ministry. I don't know why.
He's a Charlie Robbins guy, not Charlie Robbins.
Tony Robbins.
Tony Robbins, yeah.
But he says email is work you've not agreed to do. And I mean, maybe he read that somewhere, but it's a really helpful thing. And so I need to stop indulging that kind of email. And one key way to do that is to stop sending those kinds of emails.
Yes. Especially after 12 p.m. on a Friday, if I may say.
Yeah. Yeah, but I just think any time. I think I don't want to be given a half thing. And I do this, and I know I do this, and you are one of the victims of this, and I'm going to stop doing it.
Bless you, brother.
So help me God. I mean, we do it by text. Yes. And we have to kind of, and occasionally
plus there's time zones problems as well. So sometimes I wake up, dear listener, to a 6 a.m. text from James Cary. But it's not his fault, because he's living 5 hours in the future. It's just the way it is.
Yes. Yeah. Some say 5 years in the future, but again, that's for others to say.
It's for others to say,
to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I have to take ownership of email in the sense that I do have multiple email addresses. There's one I check more regularly than other ones. And so I'm kind of used to the idea that this is something that needs to be managed rather than, I just can't have 14,000 messages in my inbox unread. I mean, Tim Ferriss checks his, when he was going the nuclear option, he was saying, I just check my emails for an hour on Tuesdays.
Wow.
You know, and everybody who works for me basically is told, if there's a problem, fix it. If it involves spending less than a certain amount of money, you don't need my permission to fix it. You just fix it. And if it involves spending more than X amount of money.
Wow.
And also, he talked about how there were clients who, when he had this kind of, I think, maybe bodybuilding, health business, food, something, supplements, or I can't quite remember what it was. There were some people who were sort of giving him a hard time about delivering the product here or there, and it wasn't quite right and it wasn't quite this. And he basically said to the client, I'm afraid I'm going to have to let you go. I'm not selling to you anymore because you're just, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
So this is how things are going to be. And if you want this, then this is the deal. And if you don't want that, so I think, but here's let's pivot, maybe pivot.
Well, one thing to say on emails before we do that is it a sin to not respond to an email? I've been thinking about this for quite a lot. I think it's not.
This is where I was pivoting to.
Yeah, okay. Well,
it's just, at what point?
Yeah, go on.
At what point is it rude? So you say your thing.
Well, so I was going to say, I recently reached out via email to an old chum of mine, asking him if he wanted to come on the show. Now, and I've not heard a response back. Now, our listeners are probably thinking, smart guy. And I would agree. I mean, but it occurred to me, and I didn't take offense at that because I know he's a pastor, and he also has, a pretty much higher profile than either of us, and therefore he's got more things on his plate. He doesn't need to. I'm not owed an answer. It's fine. I mean, I'm just assuming he's too busy and doesn't think it's a good use of his time, which is a very valid response. So that made me think, well, maybe there are emails I get where actually it wouldn't be sinful to just kind of triage them into the archive and not actually respond. I don't know. What do you think?
It is difficult, isn't it? And I think those productivity books are probably a bit more robust. And it may be that the way we send emails and use email means that we are reaping the whirlwind of emails because we are also those who bombard others. It is difficult because we do have to take ownership of our time, and they are not the only person in the equation, the person who's emailed you. Your children are also part of it. Your wife is part of it. Your mission of the deep work that you want to do that requires your undivided attention, which basically squeezes the amount of time that you can, if you spent half an hour on your email every day and you're going to send better emails, how many emails are you going to type, read and respond to, make a plan for, and then send in half an hour? 2? Yeah. Well, newsflash, I get more than 2 emails a day. I don't know about you, Barry.
I get more than 2 emails a day from you.
3.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't.
So I think one thing that Cal Newport says though is quite refreshing. He says, even if you're like an author who's starting out or something like that, and people are emailing you, they're not thinking about you as much as you think they are. So if you don't respond, they're probably not.
They're not
hung
mad.
Up on that.
Yeah.
They're probably a bit sorry that they didn't, and you might get a response eventually. I mean, I don't get that many emails like that, where it's sort of people I kind of know who say, "Oh, do you want to come and do a thing or something like that?" And that's fine. I often say, "Look, if you want me to come and do a thing, then I'd love to come and do a thing. I've got a show going around at the moment called Water into Wine." I do get quite often could you ask that famous person to come and do a thing for our church?
And I'm probably not available, so.
Yes. If that's you asking, Please don't ask me.
Yes, yeah.
That person with whom you have no connection does not want to do a favour for your church.
Yeah.
Because they're quite busy. That's why you've heard of them.
That's awkward. That's really awkward.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
do you think they would? Do you think they'd want to come to my church in, in Devon and do a thing? They live in London. That's a whole day. That's a travel. That's a gig. That's more travelling.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's right.
But
what about
I'm
texts?
sure that I'm also asking people equally unreasonable things.
Give
your brain space to my sudden idea that I've had.
Yeah, that's what I find most difficult. Not specifically from you, but just generally, is just this.
But also from me.
But maybe a bit from you, because you are an ideas generator. And I think my mind works. I get very easily derailed. I know we're being told everybody gets derailed now. Like, what is it they say? A text interruption from someone sort of sets you back an hour or something from what you're doing. But I think I've realised how utterly, monotasky I am, and yet it was ironic. I was listening to a great episode recommended by one of our patrons, which I'll refer to in a minute. And even as I was listening to that podcast episode about monotasking, I'm reading their website at the same time. I'm thinking, get a grip. It's just become so ingrained in us, hasn't it? We've almost forgotten how to be, to be planted in one particular spot, just focusing. One of the tips they had was, when you're having a conversation with someone, treat it as if you're recording a podcast episode. So you're really, really listening. Well, hopefully. James obviously doesn't listen to anything I say, because why would he? But yeah, it's just that sort of level of really, really concentrating. And I find that I feel like the muscles that I used to have to be able to do that have kind of atrophied a bit. Do you not feel that? I feel like, I don't want to blame the iPhone for everything, but I think it's got a large role in this.
That's partly why I've still not updated. I've got an old iPhone SE, which is the steam is starting to come out of it, but I don't particularly
want to spend. It runs on steam, that's why.
Yeah. But also, even now, I used to listen to a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos whilst doing household tasks, and actually, I've pulled that back a bit. Even though I still do that a fair bit, I don't do it all the time. Whenever I go for a walk, I now don't listen to anything when I'm walking. I just try not to think about anything, actually. Sometimes Cal Newport would say, you may have a problem that you're trying to solve. And actually, when I used to go swimming, sometimes when I was writing a sitcom script or something, I might just thinking, I can't quite work out how to get the guy to put the biscuit tin under the car in order to... And by the time I've swum a few lanes, I'm like, oh, yeah, I know how to do that.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
So, yeah, I think that sort of constant distraction is a real problem, and the multitasking. And I think there's one other thing about the internet which I think just goes back to the wider issue of productivity, is the internet and technology and the stuff that you have in your hands gives you the illusion that you personally can conquer the world.
Yeah, it's the God machine, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me more about the God machine. What do you mean by that?
I just mean it gives us the illusion that we can be omnipresent and omnipotent. Yeah. I mean, it's a godlike ability to be able to sit in a cafe in downtown DeLand and watch live what's going on in a sleepy little harbour in Sidmouth in Devon, and communicate with people there, and wake somebody up in Australia at the same time, and then broadcast your most banal thoughts to thousands of people on Twitter. It's just, it gives you the illusion of being omnipresent and omnipotent, and that breaks us, doesn't it? It breaks us as human beings. We just simply can't be that person.
I think it's partly that omnipresence thing. I think that's a really good point. The thing I would add to that is it gives you, when you see a YouTube channel that's doing really, really well, you're looking at it just thinking, well, I own all the equipment to do that. That's not technically difficult what they're doing, I should be able to do that. Why can't I have... So the Cooper and Cary YouTube channel should have 100,000 subscribers. Why wouldn't it?
Weird, isn't it? Yeah.
We have all the kit. And you go, no. And when you sort of sit down and think about it for a moment, you sort of know the reasons why it takes a long time to build anything, and it builds at its own pace and all that kind of thing. But I think the fact that, and maybe that's why lots of these artisanal craft things are really making a bit of a comeback. There's a show in the UK called The Repair Shop, where people take their broken things from their childhood. Or my grandmother had this teddy bear during the war, and she left it to me, and I'd like to be able to hand it on, and it's been loved so much, it's starting to come undone. Oh, I've got this briefcase that my father had, or this is the thing that this is a little chess set that my great grandfather had in the trenches of World War One, and you've got these amazing people who fix things slowly, deliberately, carefully, and you look at it thinking, I couldn't do that. And it's a good watch. There was a great irony there, because we have just had some technical problems, having just said the internet makes you feel like you can do anything and talk to people across the world, do anything you like. But I think the overall point I was making is it feels like people who are now famous are doing something that we can do that isn't technically difficult. There's no barrier to entry other than your desire to make it happen, and your willingness to do whatever it takes. Whereas previously, of course, you couldn't have a YouTube channel because you would need to be on television. You need to be on NBC. You'd need to be on.
But even then, imagine that you have the access to make a TV show. You're a producer in LA or whatever. It is an illusion if you think, well, if we just reproduce those ingredients, we'll have a hit too. I mean, the history of Hollywood is littered with, illustrations of that. So I think there is just, again, it's a failure to recognize the intangibles. We would call it God's sovereignty. That means that you're not in control. And even if you think you've got all the ingredients and you've got amazing super smartphone powers, don't forget Jesus. He's making this whole thing run, including your smartphone.
So the one other thing I was going to mention before, I'd love to know what you're going to do differently this year and anything else, is the deep work thing. I was just going to talk about how Cal Newport contrasts deep work and shallow work. And that deep work is the thing where you really do need to give this thing your focused time in order to get your best work done. And he makes the case that in a world of there's so much automation, and we do live in a gig economy where relatively unskilled work can just be done by somebody 3 time zones away, or it can be commoditized, that actually the value, and this is not a Christian argument, but I think it's a good one nonetheless, the value of deep work is that you're doing something that is is valuable. It's you're putting things together that nobody else has put together before. You're creating something special. In his case, he's writing academic research papers that are trying to be of an excellent quality so that he gets tenured as a professor. And for me, it would be a scripts or something that I would be writing. And I don't know what it would be for other people. Obviously, we've sort of lent on the writing quite heavily, but it may be the arts, but it may be project management. It may be a whole load of other things. It's valuable, and because we do live in such an age of a distraction, it is rare, but it is also meaningful. It really connects with people if you're doing something good. And I think that's maybe I'm reading a lot of scripts at the moment for a competition that I've been helping to run, and I'm reading a lot of scripts that actually have some interesting characters and some half decent jokes in them, but 9 out of 10 of them, it's just like this doesn't really mean anything. This is a collection of some funny people in a possibly funny situation. I don't really know why I'm watching this. And it's an annoying question to be asked, and it's in one of the great episodes of Seinfeld when they're pitching a show for Seinfeld to the network and say it's about nothing. And the head of commissioning at NBC says, "But why am I watching it?" And George says, "'Cause it's on TV." To which the NBC guy says, "Not yet." Because it has to have a reason to exist.
Yeah.
And so I think that deep work requires deep concentration, and therefore you have to plan to remove distractions, ritualize it, get a nice new notebook, do various sort of things to put yourself on the hook.
Notebooks are available on the Cooper and Cary website, by the way. The store.
They are.
Sorry, carry on.
But then also take breaks and all that kind of stuff. Shut down social media. He suggests that you just try living without it for 30 days and don't announce that you're not doing social media for 30 days.
Media, yes, yeah.
Just don't do it and see if anybody notices that you weren't there, and you'll almost certainly discover that they didn't notice you weren't there.
Yeah. Well, so as part of that, then, knowing what your main priority is in any given season of life, because again, there's that very interesting bit where, Jesus has healed a bunch of people, and then he withdraws to get some solitude, and all the disciples come out to try and find him, and they say, "Everyone's looking for you." And Jesus says, "Oh, sorry, I better get back there because they obviously need me to heal them." No, he says, "Oh, let's go somewhere else." Which is amazing. Let's go somewhere else. Why? In order that I may preach there also, for that is what I came out for. So there's a really interesting ruthless elimination in Jesus' life of, no, actually, the healing is certainly a part, but it's not my main priority. My main priority is preaching. So there are going to be times where I say no to people's physical needs. Jesus says no to people who have physical needs, who he could heal, presumably, in order to do what he principally came from. And I just thought that's very interesting with COVID, actually, just as a tiny sidebar, that prioritization of spiritual needs over physical needs. I think we've flipped that. So we do prioritize physical needs in people rather than spiritual. That's why we've closed down churches. But if we had the same priorities as Jesus, I don't think we would. But anyway, that's a sidebar for another
It's
thing.
a really good point. And anybody who's involved in some kind of Christian small group will have experience of the fact that, what can we be praying for each other? Health.
Exactly.
Spiritual maturity, discipleship. Nah, just the sore arm, please.
Yeah.
It's really frustrating.
Playing havoc with my forehand. Yeah. Just, exactly.
So the only other thing to say on the deep work thing is the fact that shallow work is also got to be done. You have other tasks to do, but the deep work needs to take priority. But also bear in mind that you probably can't do it for hours and hours, and there is a law of diminishing returns. So again, going back to that thing about kind of some kind of Superman, making yourself work. And when you're younger, you probably can go for longer, and you can pull all-nighters and do all this kind of stuff. And but the other thing to bear in mind is, so I just thought of something else, which I must have got, but it's about how we educate people, and we sort of set themselves up for some terrible habits. But the reality is that, and I say this when I'm talking to people writing sitcoms as well, I don't think you can write for much more than 3 or 4 hours a day. And whenever you read the habits of highly successful writers, most of them stop at lunchtime.
Interesting.
Or they get up super early, like Mark Wahlberg, and get it done by breakfast.
Gets around a golfing.
And I've been trying to do that already, and I'm pleased to read that been doing the right thing. I try to get my writing done before lunch and not do anything else. I don't agree to anything else. I try not to have any meetings about anything unless I can't. I'm not a monster. So that's kind of the hard work, the deep work and the shallow work.
That's helpful. That's really helpful.
Yeah. So you're not just going to become this powerhouse of deep work, who locks themselves away like some kind of a hermit and emerges every 2 years with some great magnum opus, answers a few emails and then goes back in. That's not it.
The only system of triage that I found helpful, which I suspect might have been nicked from getting things done to some extent, is that, or maybe inbox zero, I don't know where that comes from, but when I get emails, I straight away, if I can deal with them straight away and I want to deal with them straight away, then I will. Like if it takes a matter of seconds. Otherwise, I've just got 2 folders, which are action and later. So straight away, I'm either putting it into the action thing, which means, right, this really does need attention and it's going to take longer than 2 minutes. Or later, which is something that, it does need attention, but not right now. And that way, I try and keep the inbox down to almost zero. It's accumulated a bit over Christmas and New Year, but that's one thing I do. And then I have, on my desktop, I have a folder for every single project I'm working on. It's usually 6 or 7 projects. And Mac has this little thing where you can kind of color code things. So I color code them red if they're things that need to be dealt with sort of as a matter of urgency. So that means at a glance, I can always see, all right, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be working on. And these are the most pressing within that subset of things. That's pretty much the only system I have, except that I agree with you. I try to do all my writing before 12 midday, all the creative writing, and shut stuff off, then deal with emails later in the afternoon.
I think it's worth being aware that you don't need a solution that will work for the next 30 years.
Yeah, quite.
Because we're still home educating our kids, and I'm not going to get to my desk before 10 I'm going to be with my kids first thing and teach them the stuff that I need to teach them, that I've decided, I've got my oldest is going to do some GCSEs and an O-level next year. And there's things I've got to do, and the best time to do that is before 10. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll be in my office till 1:30 because they like to get their school done as much before lunch as possible, so that there's only reading books and stuff to do after lunch. And then, and then in the afternoon I can be satisfied that I'm doing stuff that I've done the best I can with the time I had. So,
have you got any recommendations on particular resources or books or things in this particular area? I know we've got some from our patrons, but have you got any you wanted to flag up? The Cal Newport one sounds good. Yeah,
I like the Cal Newport one. It was quite sensible and helpful and persuasive, and and he admits that he finds it hard to do everything himself, but actually one or two things he did do, and he really surprised himself about how effective they were, and he gives some really good examples. So I would recommend that. And I would recommend the 4-hour work week. It's bonkers, but what it really did for me was help me focus on, I'm very lucky that there are lots of things that I could do. What am I going to do? And that really helped me work out what I could do. So I think in that sense it was just being aware that we spend an awful lot of our time actually trying to please people. And that's a mug's game. It's exhausting. It's not healthy, and it's unproductive. So stop it. But you don't have to be, a maniacally single-focused jerk about it. But yeah, so those would be my hot tips. I think I probably should read that book, Getting Things Done. That does sound quite good. How about you?
Well, we've mentioned it a couple of times, but also Emily, one of our patrons, recommends Reagan Rose's website and podcast, redeemingproductivity.com. That is coming from a Reformed Christian perspective. Not all of these obviously are. Adrian recommends Ploductivity by Douglas Wilson, and the summary of that is: plod, don't sprint, be fruitful like a tree, not efficient like a machine.
I've listened to the audio version of that, and it is actually pretty good. And it really does reveal and persuade you of the value of little and often, little and often, little and often.
It's good.
I think that's...
Andy recommends the Art of Manliness podcast. There's a particular episode called Become a Focused Monotasker, which is, just finish listening to that, it's very helpful. And he also recommends John Mark Comer's podcast, Fight, Hustle, and Hurry.
Yes.
That's good.
Well, actually, I listened to The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Comer.
Yeah.
And that was quite good. It's obviously it sounds very, very Portland, Oregon, but it was still
I think he's
helpful.
coming from I really enjoyed his podcast. I forget what it was called, where he was being interviewed. Well, it's basically a conversation between two guys. Do you remember that one? I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah.
It was very good. Personally, I'd recommend Zeal Without Burnout, Christopher Ash's book. He's got skin in the game, so that's worth reading. And of course, James and I are both aware, dear listener, that we're probably stressing you out with all these recommends and making you feel unproductive. But maybe just pick one you like the sound of and go with that. I think they're all pretty good.
Well, I've got some thoughts about school, and I also want to talk about the movie Chef by Jon Favreau and work-life balance, but we shall discuss that with our Patreons after we've wrapped up the main podcast episode.
Very good.
That's a little tease there to join us on Patreon.
We probably ought to wrap up, do you think, at this point?
Yeah.
So, if you would like to become a patron and get all sorts of wonderful goodies, which are currently popping up onto your screen, you can go to our website and you'll see there's a lovely little Patreon red logo bottom right. Just click on that, and that will sort you out. James, if people want to go old school and send us an email, after all we've said about email, but if they wanted to do that, how could they do that?
They could email us cooperandcarey@gmail.com, and I do check the email.
We do read it.
I have 3 different email browsers for up to 7 different web addresses, email addresses. But that's on one that I do check every day, so I do see the emails that come in, and you see them too. So we sometimes reply to them just via email, and sometimes we'll have them on the episode. So just get in touch and tell us what you're thinking, and what stuff you think we might want to talk about as well, and thoughts on what we have talked about. But the best way for access is Patreon and the Discord chat as well for Patreon members. So
But thank you for joining us for this chat on productivity. We will be back, God willing, in 2 weeks' time with our next episode. So thanks very much. Cheerio.
Cheerio.